Well, I came to England in 1962, but I've always lived in a multicultural context. And the fact is that I think that in any ex-colony or colony, any of the colonized world, is actually automatically multicultural, even without the, and in India, of course, even without becoming of British, it was multicultural. But actually, no one from the colonies, to say that way, can be anything but multicultural. You kind of carry it inside you as a condition, which is what took me back to India after I'd graduated and been a partner in a firm. I went back in 1986 to do a PhD on actually examining just what had happened to Indian architecture as a result of that colonial encounter, and why it had sort of lost its sense of self entirely. And I think I used to think of it as a sort of a post-colonial shock that those countries which had experienced colonization they seemed to lose the power to be self-critical in a confident way. And there were lots of things I found, but that's not really what I'm mainly going to talk about. And of course, in India anyway, my community, which I lived, which was right in the center of India, and it was an ashram started by Gandhi. There were all the parts of India represented there anyway. And I think nothing could be less, or nothing could be more multicultural than my mother from Kerala marrying my North Indian father. There were plenty of people in Kerala who wanted to excommunicate, so to speak, all of us for being paraya. The word paraya comes from paraya, which is a Malayali word, which means the other. That's all it means. And so we were paraya for many of them. And as for my North Indian family, for my father to marry a black Madrasi, which is what all South Indians are called, was actually terrible fortune. So we were multicultural anyway, and probably they could have sometimes done with the centre here, but we didn't experience any of that. So I've seen in my time in England, in 54 years, the cultural scene change dramatically. I was the first non-white boy in my school, and now we design schools in which 56 languages are spoken. There are hundreds of other, and so many religions are practiced and described. But I was fascinated as an architect on what impact this condition, call it post-colonial condition in one way, or multicultural condition. For me, by the way, multicultural is a fact, not a doctrine. And the fact that it's so often paraded as a doctrine in order to knock it down again just seems to me to be the most sort of low trick that is played for people with completely other agendas. But so what was going on? And that's what took me back to do my PhD. And there are so many stories I could tell in that, funny stories and serious stories of mother-in-laws still using a kitchen where they could only cook squatting on a chula, and their daughter-in-law refusing to go in there and building her own kitchen next door, so that when she cooked, she had a proper counter and wall cabinets. And actually, that's who she was. That's all there is to it. There's no adoption of something foreign or anything like that. She actually couldn't even squat on the floor. She had already, by the way she was brought up and the school she went to, she was physically unable to do what her mother-in-law did. So she was already a different person in a way from that. And we discovered how a form of housing and urbanism had grown up in a society over 5,000 years, suitable to climate and culture, in that very sophisticated way that vernacular architecture comes into being, as opposed to designed objects made by individual designers, which are also, of course, very interesting, but actually they're quite different. And how that 5,000 years of tradition had been abandoned within 50 years as any guide to how you might design now. So that was the puzzle in 50 years. And actually, funnily enough, it was only once independence was achieved that India got rid of all its old constructional ways and design disciplines, effectively. The British, one of the things they did was actually to study and record some of these forms of architecture and the principles behind them. I won't summarize any of those conclusions, but just to say that it's a whole story, and there is a PhD languishing in some library that you can really, if you're really interested, you can go and find out. The next thing we did was we wrote a book in collaboration with a number of other black and minority architects called Accommodating Diversity in 1991, because we realized how the way houses were being designed through official guides, such as the Parker Morris Standards for Space in the Home, the GLC's work, or LCC's work, they had at their center an idea of a family which was entirely unrealistic for the modern world. It was, obviously it was a family where the woman was actually in a kitchen, in a laboratory almost like setting, where everything was in easy reach, and there were fantastic anthropomorphic drawings where the people did actually look like robots because they had several arms like this, and everything had to be that wide and this deep, but you had to reach it. And you had to. The point was that you should be able to cook an entire meal without moving your feet. And so this was, and we thought actually not only is this totally inappropriate to the cultural diversity that now exists in this country and the way people live, but actually it's inappropriate for anyone. It's not just about diverse cultures in this multicultural society. And then we went out of our way then to design places that were not specific to one culture or another. We actually found what was common, really, in all cultures. And just as people say now, that if you design a building in which somebody with disabilities can use every facility and go upstairs and downstairs, that building is better for everybody, anyway. And one of the things about inclusivity is that it's not for the other, it's not for somebody else. It's actually is for us all, and it makes better places. So I'm very fascinated by the idea where, very intensely studying the specific, the whole aim is to come back to the general. I think Einstein said after doing the special theory of relativity, he said, in the end, the goal of all science is to find the general, or something like that. He said it a bit more elegantly. So the general theory, which at first sight sounds like, oh, that must be the beginning, then he got to the specific. No, it's the specific that led to the general. And it was the intensity of the study of the specific, exactly how people use space, that led us to do buildings that are not so tied down to one or the other. Now, I can sort of, in my head is running another track which tries to relate it to the reason for the existence of this centre, and of course, online relationships, and so I'm trying to marry those up, but I'm sure there are deep down connections that we can all make for ourselves. But then, around the time of the millennium, there arose in Bethnal Green an idea of building a centre which actually celebrated this multicultural society. And out of that experience, I then re-engaged, in a way, at a different level, with the idea of what is culture, what is multicultural, and how does that relate to architecture. And I wrote a piece for the Architectural Association Files, which is the referee journal of the Architectural Association. And I started it like this. A Londoner might wake up on a futon, tie on a sarong. The reason I said that was that David Beckham had been pictured, and put on a CD by Tumani Devate, and then have an Ulster fry for breakfast. She might spend the day in a school that honours 5 religions, teaches 66 languages, and contains a greater variety of ethnic groups. At lunch, she might have falafel and pita. After work, go to yoga classes before meeting friends for a Vietnamese meal, and then maybe an Iranian film. Yet throughout the day, this Londoner will have been in buildings and places that, in their fabric, contain hardly any trace of belonging to a multicultural, post-colonial metropolis. Only a mosque here or a temple there might hint at any plurality of architectural vision. Indeed, there will be rather more evidence of London's history as a colonial metropolis in the form of administrative buildings, statues and memorials than of a multicultural society. And you realize that multiculturalism imprints the city with a surface which is very different from the surface that was there before. But I then started imagining an archaeologist in 200 years, 500 years, name your time, excavating London, which is no longer inhabited. Sorry, it's a sad scenario, but I was just imagining this. And would they find, through the archaeology, any trace that this had ever been a multicultural place? And I thought they wouldn't, except for the mosque here and the temple there. And actually, there are thousands of them, by the way, and it is interesting that when it comes to mosques, temples and so on, there are plenty of signs of that. However, there is a water tower, Victorian water tower, that makes a very fine Sikh Gurudwara actually in Birmingham, and actually its tower stands perfectly symbolic of lots of things, because it turns out the towers are actually for all sorts of things. And the chapel built by Methodists in Brick Lane, then taken over by Huguenots, then turned into a synagogue, is now a mosque. And there's not a beat is missed in all this. Nothing, it just happens in the same form. So this slight fixation that multiculturalism might take, or culture might always take, a deterministic artificial form, is not really right. And I don't know if there's a parallel between that and the kind of emergent future of how we, in our relationship